speak a little bit. Oops. Hi, everybody. My name is Lainie Liberti, and Natasha asked me to come in here and speak a little bit to you today about working with teens and connection. So I want to give you a little bit of background as to who I am and the work that I do so you understand where I'm coming from. And then hopefully I'll be able to provide for you some really valuable information. So a little bit about me. I am a mom, and that to me is the most important role. I am a single mom, and now my son is 21. We are advocates for a type of learning called self-directed learning. And through self-directed learning, so many wonderful things have happened. So we are world schoolers, and what that means is we've been location independent for the last 12 years. I'm speaking to you today from Mexico, and I still am traveling or being a world schooler. So we started to world school when my son had just turned 10, so 9 and 10, just right there on the cusp. And at that time, we pulled him out of school. I pulled him out of school, and we were going to travel originally for 1 year. We still haven't gone back. Like I said, he's now 21. So from 9, 10 to 21, he's been raised without having a permanent location. We've been world schooling. And through that process, we've also been unschooling or practicing what's known as self-directed learning. So that has really become the foundation of our educational approach. Now, as a self-directed learner or an unschooler, many of you know the term as unschooling, a couple of things occurred. So first of all, I started off as an attachment parent. And through attachment parenting, I always applied the partnership parenting paradigm. And that moved into the facilitation of the education process. So at the foundation of everything we did, it was based on partnership. And partnership and giving the space and the freedom to self-direct our own journeys. I said our, which meant I too was on a journey to learn. And through world schooling, that became the predominant theme in our lives for the last 12 years. Through that, what I've discovered is, and like I said, he was 9. We'll just say he was just about ready to turn 10. And he's now 21. So what that encompasses is his entire adolescence was on the road. And as a parent, we were living in close quarters. And in fact, if you can imagine what world schooling is, it's living without a traditional base, and it's not living a very traditional life. So our life was a combination of learning, working, traveling, moving, exploring, being present, all of those incredible things. And what that meant was we were together. And many perceive the adolescence as the most difficult time in a person's life. And for me, it was the most exciting time. It was the most exciting time to be a parent. Now, for me, my adolescence was riddled with disconnection, with rebellion, with anger, with a lot of pain. So I went through a really, really difficult period. And during my childhood, and during my adulthood and before I became a parent, my job was to heal that. And I found that once my son moved into his adolescence, I was so equipped to be a facilitator and to be a partner with him on this journey. And the thing that I learned that was the most important thing to be his facilitator and his partner was connection. I was able to show up for him in a way that nobody showed up for me in my own adolescence. And going through the healing of trauma, going through the healing of belief systems that were not serving me, gave me the equipment to understand what that looks like and what an adolescent really needs. So to answer your question, Natasha, no, he never went through rebellion. He never went through, crazy anger or really disconnecting from our connection. And that is at the core of what I'm going to talk to you about today. Why did he not go down that path? What prevented him from having a traumatic adolescence? And then I'm going to share with you a little bit about the work that I've been doing with adolescents. So as my son did move into his own teenage years, I learned, told you I was on a self-directed learning journey as well. I learned absolutely everything I could about the psychology of the adolescent brain, the biology behind it, and even some of the physiological functions like hormones, and understanding what those processes were, the stages were. And after going through a really dedicated 10 or 15, almost 20 years of my own healing journey, I had quite a bit of insight as to how these things played out and understanding that from a developmental perspective. So when he would pull away and really need time to process things, I give him the space, and the partnership and the connection was at the foundation that moved us through his entire adolescence. That felt safe, it felt secure. It also felt like he was heard and understood and valued for who he was in that moment. And that's really an important aspect. And I can get into that a little bit more when I speak about parenting teens and tweens. But first I'm going to talk about the adolescent experience from their perspective. And I'll sort of flash back into my own life and create the relevance to this story for you. So part of the developmental stage of the adolescent brain is they're starting to individuate and pull away a little bit in terms of creating identity for themselves. And in fact, this is the time where their frontal cortex is not always online and they're not able to process consequences. And so this is the time where traditionally risky behavior happens. This is the time where they're trying on different identities in order to figure out how they fit into the world. This is also a time for social learning. And as the adolescent starts to individuate, they're seeking more social input and more peer-to-peer kind of stimulation and learning. And by recognizing that this was the stage that he was in at 14, we started to address those needs. We were still traveling, and in fact, we were in Peru at the time. And what we decided to do was to host teen learning retreats. And these were in the form of temporary learning communities. And that propelled me down the path to learn more about social learning and building community and community development. And then, learn about the foundation of problem solving and conflict resolution. And this is when I started reading everything I could about nonviolent communication and applying that to my own sort of tool belt. And that became one of the most powerful transformations in not only the lives of the teens that we were serving, because now we've got teens coming together and we're very intentional about world schooling, and we're going to different cultures and we're exploring the outer worlds. But I was always very intentional about using the outer worlds as the vocabulary to explore the inner worlds. And to answer your question, Natasha, yes, I've got a fabulous book that I recommend to anybody who has a teenager or an adolescent in their life. By the way, adolescence is generally from 12 to 25. So I guess my son is still an adolescent, but just so you know, that is the time period or age period of the traditional brain development. And that's when they stop developing it in the way that an adolescent brain develops. So the book that I totally recommend is called Brainstorm, The Power and Purpose of the Teenage Brain by Daniel Siegel. And that's my Bible. So, I mean, I love the book. There's so many incredible other resources out there. But I think that's the first introduction to understanding attachment theory and healing your own attachment wounds as a parent so you don't bring that into the relationship. And I'm going to touch on that in just a little bit. But I'm trying to weave the journey so you understand the background and the trajectory that I'm coming from and moving towards. So as we started to host these temporary learning communities, we would focus on things like team building, and we would workshop these really big concepts like stepping outside of your comfort zone and saying yes to things, and looking at fear and recognizing when fear was a part of the experience and how that shut us down. We would also play with the theme, which I think is really important today, of questioning everything. So the development of the ability to be discerning is super important. And we would do all of this and practice all of this while we're exploring other cultures in a very sort of culturally immersive, respectful way. So our first retreat was in Peru, and we were exploring the history of these archaeological sites and interacting with these really ancient traditions and learning how to weave in the villages where weaving is the most important aspect of life. That became such an important part of our journey. And the ability to step outside and explore while, focusing on these big concepts, and then come back into a community setting and unpack that stuff every night in our circle. So I developed all these like reflection tools and rituals and traditions that we would use in the retreat setting. And our retreats are anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks long. So there is a point when you are with somebody, and you guys will know this, you get to know somebody and they're on their best behavior for the first week. But if they're play acting, the real them is coming up. And so there's a sense of accountability and showing up with who you are and taking those masks off. And while we're taking those masks off, we're also exploring through which masks we are viewing the world, which means we're getting in touch with our own lenses or worldviews. And then we're able to see in reflection how those in our host country are seeing the same thing that we're seeing. And we're noticing what those lenses are, not only the similarities, but the differences, and to be able to move through the world in a very respectful way. Because when we're not aware, when we're just sort of going on autopilot and we're not questioning everything, including ourselves and the way that we're seeing things, it just becomes a habitual story. And I think by working with teens, adolescents, and bringing them into a new environment and inviting them to go inward as well as outward, this is the most incredible time of their life, to be able to really decide how they want to fit into the world. So anyway, that's the work that I had been doing for 8 years. Project World School was born, I think it was in 2012, 13 or something like that. That's when we ran our first retreat. The next year we ran a retreat in Peru, then Ecuador, and then we started to branch out. So we've done them in Mexico, Wales, South Africa, Japan, Thailand, Greece, and many of them we ran, in consecutive years. So we have ran these retreats for hundreds of teens around the world over the last, I guess, almost 8 years. So fast forward to 2020. Hello, everybody. Hello, 2020. Here we are. So part of my story, yes, and I'm going to get into that. Natasha, I promise you I will answer you. Part of my story is wanting to really recognize the way that I have been healing my own inner adolescent, and the work that gives me power and purpose and really passion is identifying that I love working with teens. And it's not just about partnering with them in the same way that I partnered with my son as he was growing up, or still is. But it's also a way to honor the wounds that I had, and to be able to show up for teens in a way that nobody ever showed up for me. And that over this year, 2020, has allowed me to go a lot deeper in terms of researching and utilizing and developing an incredible set of tools in order to do this. So my own healing involved quite a bit of tools, but they were tools that are self-directed tools, but systems that help me to process, unpack, uncover, and reprogram trauma events and beliefs that were limiting. And so I wanted to create space that I could create that kind of facilitation or guidance or partnership for teens, especially in a year that was filled with stress, right? So we know that we have this system in our head that when we are faced with trauma or fear, we go into fight, flight, or freeze response. And 2020 has given many of us a consistent trauma, fear-based input, stimulus. So many teens have been in a consistent state of fight, flight, or freeze, and many teens are shutting down. And as I shared with you before, this is a time where they're individuating. This is a time where they're stepping outside of their comfort zone and trying on new identities and really counting on social learning and social input. And because that's so impossible for many people during 2020, that creates a trauma response. So a lot of teens have been in freeze mode, not so much the flight mode, but the freeze mode. And a lot of teens are shutting down, and a lot of teens are feeling heightened sense of anxiety. And so I got to work really quick, and I decided to put together this program for teens online, using the tools that I used and then expanding that toolbox. And so I just finished up another 12-week course for teens, and the response that I'm getting from teens are, oh my God, finally I've got tools to look at this stuff. I didn't even know that this was a problem until we started to unpack all the stuff around that. And if a teen is just simply in freeze mode, they're not doing a lot. They're shutting down. They're shutting down and sort of zoning out. And a lot of times it may look like numbing out or just, just checking out. Sometimes, there has been some of the teens that I've worked with have gone into depression because of life doesn't look like the way it's supposed to look like for them. A lot of teens are in a time of transition anyway, because adolescence is all about transition. So this to me was my opportunity to really focus in on the mental health, self-development side of things and focus on partnering with teens in order to give them tools. So that's sort of the landscape of where I'm coming from and the work that I've done up until this point, and kind of a bird's eye view of my background. Now I'm going to switch the viewpoint now, because before I was speaking to you about the perspective of teens, right? And so recognizing that what they're going through as the parent, and acknowledging that our child, our teen, is in a really difficult position. The world around them looks really different than it looked like when we went through adolescence. And we're not necessarily equipped as parents to parent teens anyway, but now we're parenting teens through a pandemic where the world looks very, very different. So now I want to speak to you parents. And what I want to ask you, or what I want to share with you as parents, is there are two parts of connection. There are two parts which are the formula to actually moving through this with grace with your teen if your teen is struggling. The first one is connection, and that is your number one job. And how do you connect with your teen? And I'll give you a couple of suggestions in just a moment. But first, I want to put to you a suggestion that connecting with your teen in an authoritarian manner may not actually be connection. Right? If I am trying to tell you that you have to do this, and we just want to keep the peace, and as the teen, I just do it, that's not a true connection. That's a submission, right? That's the teen acquiescing to your will. So when I'm talking about connection, there is an element of partnership that goes with that. So that means you, parent, meeting your teen where they are. This is not you above them. This is not you below them. This is you coming together to connect human to human. Yes, and yes, what if you don't get the engagement you want? If you don't get the engagement you want, then this goes into part two of the most important thing. Part two is you, as a parent, need to work on your stuff, right? Because your triggers, your judgment, your expectations are the things that are going to stop you from connecting. So what does that mean? The question is, what if I don't get the response that I want? Then you need to figure out why it is that you think that this response that you want or expect is more appropriate than the true response that your teen is giving you. So if you can't meet your teen where they are, which means if they're having a hard time, guess what? They're not going to be polite. They're giving you a clue as to what's happening in their internal worlds. And if you, as a parent, judge those internal worlds because it doesn't match your expectation, you're not heading towards the connection, which is the key to being able to move through this with grace. So yes, working on your own triggers, understanding that there is judgment in our own expectations. Yes, we expect our children to recognize that I've given you all these opportunities and blah, 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 right? Like, and you should be grateful. Well, should they? I mean, find out why it is that that's coming up, or whatever it is that's coming up inside of you. And your work is to quiet those sorts of really loud judgments. First, look at them, recognize your triggers, and do your work around that. So when I was speaking earlier about giving tools to teens to help them identify what their habitual thinking patterns are that are generally wired during ages 0 to 7, right? That's when we lay the pattern, the framework for the wiring for our brain. And that is where the neural patterns and all that stuff goes wider. This means this. Mom does this. Mom, and dad say this. I must be this because of that. Like, those are where those patterns are laid. And during the adolescent brain development stage, we're starting to give it deeper meanings. So this is the time where they're really deciding how that earlier patterning, what it means to them. And if they can't unpack it and they can't figure it out, it creates a series of belief systems that become habitual. And us as adults, we're wired. Man, are we wired. And for me, my own healing that I talked about earlier in dealing with the past trauma was all about unpacking that and rewiring that. That comes up for me still because that's how I was wired. That just happens to be how I was wired. But now I'm not thinking habitually in the same ways that I was maybe 20 years ago because I've successfully rewired that. So that's your work as a parent. So those two things are connection and do your own work. So, and within the do your own work, that means unpacking your stuff, right? And really getting clear about your judgments, your expectations, and triggers, of course. A couple of things that I'm going to share with you as a parent that might help you. One thing might be the suggestion to use this as a mantra: connection over coercion, connection over coercion, connection over coercion. I can't even say that word over and over. But every time you're about ready to demand something or make a comment about something that your teen said, ask yourself, is this comment going to be a connection or is this going to be a coercion? And that little mantra is really, really useful. And then let me see here. Andrea just asked a question. Hi, nice seeing you too. Oh, so you've got a 10-year-old, negative thoughts about himself, introspecting. Yeah, okay. So he's got negative thoughts that he did not do good enough from his point of view. You're a perfectionist with yourself, so probably sometimes with him too. But how do I manage him now? With me, I'm working already. So if you are working on your own perfectionism and all of these sorts of behaviors come from a place of either fear. Well, first of all, for most people that try to control other people, parents try to control their teens. And when the teens are acting out, in our opinion, they're not giving us the response that we wish we had or expected. We judge their responses and we try and control even deeper, right? So control is a response from fear. And perfectionism is a self-inflicted response from fear. So for you, Andrea, your work is to unpack that and see what beliefs you have around perfectionism. I must be perfect because my worth is this, or I'm not worthy, or whatever that is. Like, there's some deep stuff around that, right? And for you, the unpacking of that will help you partner and parent somebody who's going through his own kind of negative thinking around that. So maybe this is the perfect time for you to be recognizing that, because he's starting to, at 10 years old, he's moving into his early adolescence very soon. And right now, trying to put meaning into all of these things. So I didn't play this video game well, that means I'm a terrible person. Like, these are two thoughts that he's connected, or whatever the thought is. I don't even know the exact circumstance, but he's making a connection between this thought and this thought. And the more that he habitually thinks that thought, it becomes a belief, right? And pretty soon, the subconscious is just going to keep giving it to him. It's just going to keep pouring that back out with him and to him. And so for you to start unpacking your stuff around what the belief is around your perfectionism, what's under it, what are the stacked emotions on top of that. And it could take you into some very, very raw and revealing spaces, because that's some stuff. I mean, we're looking at our character stuff that we practice and believe about ourselves for years upon years upon years, right? So there's a lot that we have stacked on top of that. You know, if I'm not perfect, I'm not this, I'm that, and I can't fail, or I can't succeed, or whatever is tied together. But it's time to unravel that for you. And that will help you partner with him with these feelings. You know, instead of telling him the opposite of what he's saying, facilitate his unpacking of that. Ask him what feeling is coming up when you're feeling that. And what is the belief under that? What feeling is coming up when you're thinking that belief? And what, you know, and just keep going. Go at least, if you can, 4 layers down, because that'll get to the root of some of the stuff that's coming up. And if you have that space, that connection, and that trust, he's going to feel safe in order to do this with you. And I think at 10, he's got the language. At 10, he knows what he's feeling. At 10, he knows what he's thinking as well, and should be able to, hopefully, be able to communicate that. And again, I'd say always go 3 to 4 layers down. That'll help you really uncover some of that stuff. So I hope that helped, Andrea. Natasha, do you work in your 12-week programs with 10-year-old? 10-year-old is kind of too young for me. I like to go deeper, and I really like to work with adolescents. I don't work with the younger ones. I discovered that my joy, my passion, and my purpose is working with teens. So for me, 10's a little young, but I know that there's a lot of people that do work with younger people, but it just isn't the thing that I do. Yeah, so I wanted to give you one more tool for a parent, right? There's lots of tools and stuff, and I actually have on my website 5 free tools that you can use today with your teen to help facilitate with them, partner with them, to start using these tools to start getting them out of, you know, if they're in freeze, to start the movement out of that. And I can share that link with Natasha, or just come back to the Facebook page and put the link in there, and I'm happy to do that. But for the parents, here's a tool. If you have a teen or an adolescent, a tween that's shutting down and not connecting, ask them, first of all, set a reminder on your phone, and you as a parent need to be consistent. either do it in breakfast or do it at dinner, but make sure it's a consistent time where you see your teen. Probably not breakfast, because we know adolescents like to sleep in. But make sure you put this on your phone and give yourself an alarm. And the alarm should remind you to go in and ask your teen, hey, do you want to chat? And that's it, right? Same time every day. Hey, do you want to talk? Do you want to chat? And make sure that you're clear that you're going in with zero agenda. You're not there to talk about that thing. You're not there to yell at them. You're not there to uncover a secret. You're just making yourself available. And you will probably get a no about 30 times. But that one time, and the consistency helps, but that one time, you know what? Okay, yeah. And if they say yes, you're going to ask them a very, very simple question. What's going on for you? Or what's alive for you right now? Or what have you been feeling? And maybe not start with the feeling if they're not accustomed to talking about their feelings, though what's going on for you? And that is probably the best question that you could ask. Then check into your work, right? This sounds super simple, but your work is don't react based on your expectation or judgment. Be really, really open, just as you were open. Yeah, 30. Just as you were open to getting a no, you were just as open to receiving a yes. And that will help shift your work as a parent too. Instead of demanding, you're partnering and respecting. You're giving them the option. You're letting them know that you're available. This is all about connection, not coercion. And if they just tell you, yeah, nothing's going on, just not feeling into anything, you just listen and you listen. And, you know, all the tools of active listening and being there. And you've heard the term before, holding space, right? That's you just offering to be there for them. And then when they're done, you just thank them for letting you in. And that's it. No comment, no fixing their problems. Moms do that. I do that. So I'm guilty. Just let them be seen and heard and understood. And the power of that simple act will go a long way. So anyway, that's it. That's all I've got for you today. Are there any other questions or anything I can help you with? If there are, you can put them into the comments. You can put them into the comments on replay, and that's great too. And I will get back to you, or just look for that. So I hope that was useful. You could find me at Transformative Mentoring for Teens to find out more information about the work that I do with teens, and also with a very dear friend of mine named Sarah Beal. We just started a course, or we're launching a course in January for parents. And it also is a 12-week course, a transformational course for parents as well. And you can find all that information at Partnership Parent Movement. Let me just make sure. We just launched the site, partnershipparentmovement.com. And so Sarah works with parents, and she does one-on-one coaching. I don't work with parents. I love you, parents, but my joy is working with teens, except for partnering with Sarah. in teaching and facilitating this course, which is kind of like a combination of group coaching, but also some challenges and some deep dives. And over the 12 weeks, you will be transformed, I promise you, as a parent. So that's what I'm doing. Yes, I will. I will put both links in the comments. I promise I will. All right, guys, thank you. And that's it for me. I'm out.